the meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome to the November 9th, 2022 City Council meeting. We acknowledge we're on traditional lands of Treaty 4 territory, treaty signed with 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan, parts of Alberta and Manitoba, and the lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and homeland of the Métis Nation. The City of Regina owes its strength and vibrancy to these lands and diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory, as well as people from around the world who continue to be welcomed here and call Regina home. In consideration, as yesterday was Indigenous Veterans Day, I just want to make a comment about a land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgements stem out of truth and reconciliation. Treaty acknowledgement is about respect and an acknowledgement that we understand the mutual benefit behind signing of treaty. We are a city of diverse people, and really in the spirit of treaty, it's to engender a sense of belonging that everyone here can be prosperous and belong, frankly. And that reconciliation is not a process, although we do script this in. It's not a process, it's not intended to be disingenuous, but rather to ensure that the organization or the structure of the city of Regina acknowledges reconciliation and the relationship that has developed and continues to develop over time. Some members of council and city administration are attending today through video conferencing. I'll remind everyone once more, keep your video camera and microphone off, and when you're speaking, unmute your microphone and enable your video camera. Some delegations may be attending the meeting today through teleconferencing to address City Council on various items on the agenda. Council, first up, can I have someone move a motion to approve the agenda at the call of the chair with the following adjustment? I'm asking that we table consideration of item CR 22-122, the 2023 City Council and Committee meeting calendar, to the November 23rd City Council meeting, simply due to the fact that we have a significant portion of council absent from today's meeting, and that idea of consensus building around recommendations. Thank you. Can I get a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. I'll ask if any are opposed. Thank you. Carried. Can I have someone move a motion to approve the meeting minutes from October 26, 2022 meeting of City Council? Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. A seconder, Councillor Nelson. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Carried. First up, we are in consideration of CR 22-121. We have delegations here, I believe, in person. Could I ask Delegation Kevin Reese to please come forward? Mr. Reese, I'm going to ask that you please introduce yourself for the record, the organization you're representing, if any, and where you happen to reside. You'll have 5 minutes to address council, after which time you'll have the opportunity to answer any questions that they may have for you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Mayor Masters and members of City Council. My name is Kevin Reese. I am the president of Regina Developments, and I live here in Regina. And I'm representing College Developers, the owners of the land for the discretionary use application before you today. We are pleased that Ramey Property Group has made this application to build 2 apartment buildings in the Canterbury development. We are here today to offer our support for the project and respectfully request that you approve the application. A precursor to considering the application, 2 minor changes are required to the zoning bylaw. The first is the change in the land use from a mixed-use building to a medium-density residential building. The neighborhood plan for Canterbury was first approved in 2007 and showed a mixed-use building for this site. The commercial environment has changed substantially since 2007 and has become clear that main floor commercial would not be viable for this building, given that there's already enough commercial development within Canterbury. Canterbury has previously met the mixed-use objectives of the neighborhood plan and creating additional mixed-use space in Canterbury would jeopardize the financial viability of the existing commercial businesses. We suggest that creating additional dwelling units rather than additional commercial space is the best course of action for the long-term success of all the business owners and residents of Canterbury. The second change to the zoning bylaw is to the height restriction. The current policy calls for a maximum height of 13 meters. This building happens to be 13.97 meters high. It is our understanding that the additional height is required for the dwelling units to have ceiling heights that are acceptable for today's tenants. It has become an expectation that dwelling units have a ceiling height greater than 8 feet. This is the reason for the increase in the overall building height to 13.97 meters. An increase of less than a meter will not affect any of the surrounding residents' views of the neighborhood park spaces and will not affect the views for people who are enjoying the parks. Included in Appendix A 4.1 of the report are diagrams identifying the building heights of other buildings in the neighborhood. Many of the buildings are significantly taller than 13.97 meters. We respectfully request that Regina City Council approves these minor changes to the zoning bylaw for Canterbury. The Canterbury Neighbourhood Plan is a highly regulated direct control district. The architecture of the building, complete with underground parking, the site design, and the preservation of the existing trees have met all of the characteristics contemplated for Canterbury and have maintained the heritage significance of the former Diocese of Coppell. Regina's official community plan calls for intensification through infill development. This project will add 100 dwelling units within walking distance of downtown Regina. At the same time, residents of the two buildings are able to enjoy our beautiful Wascana Park just a short walk away. The proximity of these residential buildings to these amenities reduces the need for vehicles. Canterbury is a unique development for the city of Regina. It has taken many years for the site to develop, and for good reason. College Developers has taken the time and care necessary to find the right projects for Canterbury. We think we can all agree that Canterbury is a success, and it is now time to complete the project. To create a vibrancy for our city, and in particular downtown Regina, we need people. Adding these two apartments right next to downtown will help reach this goal. We are excited about the project, and we hope you are as well, and approve the application. In closing, we would like to thank the City of Regina Planning Department and the report that they prepared for you today. I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rees. Any members of council have any questions for the delegation? Thank you. Councillor Stanichuk, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, did you call my name?
Councillor Stanichuk?
Yes? Can you hear me?
A little bit. One moment. We've got a volume issue here. Try it again.
Okay, can you hear me?
There we go. It's perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Mr. Rees, for appearing. Through the mayor, I have just a couple of questions. Regarding the rental units, it's geared towards seniors. Are you planning, will it be available for anyone else, or you're gearing it just as a seniors apartment?
Mayor Masters, I'd like to defer the answer to that question to Barry Ramey, who is actually the builder and owner of the project. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Then I will save some other questions for him too. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanichuk. Sir, I see no further questions from council. Thank you very much again for your presentation this afternoon. I ask you to return to the gallery.
Thank you.
I'd like to call upon Delegation Barry Remy. Ask that you please come down to the gallery. Introduce yourself for the record, organization you represent, and where you reside on a regular basis. You'll have 5 minutes to address City Council, after which time you'll have the opportunity to answer questions they may have for you. Good afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Hello, Mayor Masters and members of City Council. My name is Barry Ramey, and I am co-owner of the applicant, Ramey Property Group, Inc. I'm here to speak in support of City Council approving the amendments and uses requested in our applications. The report from City Planning and Community Development sets out the details of our requests, the proposed project itself, together with public commentary and the administration's response. I wish to provide a context for these applications by describing our intentions with regard to the proposed development and its target customer market. Our company has been active in apartment development since the 1960s. In recent years, we have discovered that a significant demand exists for newly built seniors-oriented rental apartments, and this is what we are proposing for 1751 College Drive. This type of rental apartment development is unique in a number of ways. It is built to a standard and quality similar to new condominium developments and has similar amenities, such as underground parking. It also features larger than average size suites compared to others in the market, and it offers month-to-month leases rather than fixed-term leases. This building, however, can be distinguished from what are commonly known as assisted living facilities in that it does not provide meals to tenants or offer personal or medical services. We have found to be attractive to seniors. There are commonalities among the tenants who want to live in these buildings. They are healthy, active, independent seniors who are ready to move on from their single-family homes but have no need or desire to live in an assisted living facility, and they like the flexibility of renting rather than owning. As well, they are interested in being part of a community with others who are at the same stage of life as they, and where they can interact with their neighbors. We believe that this type of community at 1751 College Avenue would be successful and would be a perfect complement to the surrounding development, which includes townhome and apartment condominiums and assisted living facilities. We also note that the official community plan for the area encourages both rental housing and seniors housing on the Diocese of Capel site. We believe that many of the public comments on our proposed development were made without knowledge of our intended use for the site and the target market. Questions were raised by some about the adequacy of parking. As indicated in the administration report, the proposed number of parking stalls of 117 far exceeds the minimum number of parking stalls required for the development of 100. Based on our experience with previous projects, we believe that this number of parking stalls is sufficient for both residents and visitors. The infill location and the senior tenant demographic mean that most tenants come to the building with just one car and some with none. Additionally, as a rental building, the property owner can control the utilization of parking stalls. Simply put, when we run out of extra parking stalls, we just stop renting to those with more than one car. Others were concerned about the impact of the new development on traffic in the area. Compared to an empty lot, the proposed development would generate incremental traffic. But when compared to alternative uses, the impact on area traffic is not as significant. We are proposing to replace the main floor commercial in one building with residential. Traffic is the lifeblood for commercial businesses. Our request to remove the requirement for nearly 20,000 square feet of commercial space on the site would drastically reduce the impact of the development on area traffic. Furthermore, our development is proposed for occupancy by seniors with a maximum density of 2 persons per unit. Our experience is that these tenants, mostly retired, simply do not generate the same overall quantity of traffic or the peaks in traffic during rush hour. This development would meet a market demand for seniors rental housing in the city, would be an important finishing piece to the Canterbury development, and would maintain and enhance an important architectural and landscaping heritage location. I would be pleased to respond to any questions that council may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Remy. Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you. I'm very pleased you're building this as an infill project. I'm just looking for some insight. What about building this sort of multi-unit housing as an infill as opposed to in Greenfield was attractive to you?
Our company has historically sought out infill locations because our experience is that that is what our target market, seniors, is looking for. So this absolutely fit what we were looking for this type of product. And we've been successful in other cities with seniors housing in infill locations just like this.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor LeBlanc. Councillor Stadnicek.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. So my question through the mayor was regarding your target audience is seniors. I guess so. There's a two-part question. Define senior. At what age are you defining senior? And if for some reason you could not rent to could not fill all of the units, would you be renting to other than seniors?
To answer your first question, yes, we market this as a 55-plus project. Sorry about that. I'm that age too. In truth, the typical tenant or the average age of the tenant is much higher, more in the range of 65 to 70. Is what we see, though we will see from the full range of 50-somethings to 80-somethings in our buildings. To answer your second question, if we couldn't find enough senior tenants to move into the building, I guess that's never happened to us before. I suppose we would have two options. One would be to lower our rents to make it more attractive to seniors to join our building, or perhaps lower our threshold to 45 plus. I guess that's what we would consider.
Okay, thank you. And through the chair, if they're the residents in a particular unit have family coming to visit, I know that there were some concerns raised about parking. I noticed that on the drawings, that some of the parking spots, there's not a lot of parking at ground level. Would that be all allocated for visitor parking for people? Like if a son or daughter was coming to stay with their parents for a couple of days, how would you arrange that?
Yeah, certainly we would provide for visitor parking on the site. This zoning is somewhat unique in that there is not a minimum required number of visitor parking stalls as there is in other zoning districts or jurisdictions. Our experience is that visitor parking for this target market requires perhaps one stall for every 25 units. So for a project this size, we would allocate 4 or 5 on the site for visitor parking, but knowing that we would have the discretion to right-size that based on our experience once the building is up and running.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters, I also know that there are a couple of assisted living facilities not far from there, the College Park units. Is one of the attractions of this site that people could live independently there? If they need more assistance, they stay in their own neighborhood? Are you thinking of kind of like an aging in place strategy for this unit?
Definitely. There's townhomes on the site which would cater to a younger demographic. There's apartment condominiums built to the south, and having the assisted living facilities down the street, I think, would be attractive to an individual who wasn't ready for that, but knew that that was in their future and that it would just be a short move away when the time came.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stadnicek. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Mayor. So just in regards to the visitors parking, how many stalls are for visitors compared to the doors? Like, did you say 18? How many stalls are designated to, how many parking stalls are there?
Okay, there's 117 parking stalls, 100 units.
100 units. Okay.
And we have not yet designated the number of visitor parking stalls, though I'd indicated that we would more than likely come out with 4 or 5 based on our prior experience, but knowing that we have the discretion to adjust that to meet what our customers are looking for.
Thank you. I know you develop many as well in Saskatoon as well. Saskatoon does have a designated visitor rate that you have to meet when you build these. Do you know what that ratio is?
Yes, it is. It's one parking stall for every 8 units. But I can tell you from our experience that we have visitor parking stalls that sit empty year-round. And in our view, for our target market, the requirement, that particular requirement is excessive.
Okay. So just kind of finding that balance between having enough and obviously not in excess as well. Regards the amenities for seniors, so my mom is in a senior one that, it's not senior, it's 55 plus. There's a little gathering area, there's a little workout room. Does this have something like that in this?
Yes, if you look at the plans, we have, I guess, a lounge, because it's more of a lounge than a meeting room, where social activities and recreation take place, and we have an exercise room as well.
Okay. And last, in regards to bikes and space like that, storage, is there any extra storage area for if people have bikes or where they want to store their Christmas trees, like that kind of stuff within the plan?
Yes, within the units, there is space for storage, but as you can imagine, in apartments, it's limited. We also build storage units at the front of the underground parking stalls. And then with regard to bicycles, I believe the zoning provides for bicycle parking, and we have provided that in, or bicycle storage or lockup. We've provided that in our plans.
Okay. Okay, that's all I have. It's a great location. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bresciani. One more look. Mr. Remy, no further questions from council, so thank you very much for presenting this afternoon, and I'll ask that you return to the gallery.
Thank you.
We'll now consider item CR 22-121, proposed neighborhood plan and zoning bylaw amendments, discretionary use application for 1751 College Avenue. Councillor Nelson, could I ask that you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Mayor Masters. During city planning, when we met, questions were asked, we all voted unanimously. We're looking for concurrence. This is a great new facility and a great location for seniors within walking distance to the park, College Park, the restaurants, the hairdressing, the doctor's offices. I mean, it's a perfect fit and very welcomed by us and I'm sure our community. So without any further questions, I think that's all I have. Thank you, Mayor Masters.
Thanks very much, Councillor Nelson. As mover, can I get a seconder on the report? Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Do any members of council have any questions or comments of either administration or just in general? Councillor Stanichuk, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. Just to administration through the mayor, I do want to hear your comments a little bit more about the public feedback on this project. It seems that a lot of the concerns, most of the concerns were the height and traffic. And can you just assure us that those concerns you feel can be adequately addressed?
Ms. Bryden?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. With reference to the height, of course, this project is close to the Wascana Center Authority and the height overlay, so it's 0.97 meters over top of the height limit of 13 meters. And administration feels that this is a common height for a lot of the properties within the area. I keep looking at the screen, but I know I can't see. It's a common height in the area. It fits very well with the other existing buildings and is not significantly close to the park that it would impede any kind of growth or anything like that. With regards to traffic, the traffic study was conducted and administration feels that the flow of traffic in the area will be sufficient. There is plenty of on-street parking available for visitors. It's 2-hour parking, and a significant amount of parking spaces for the residents within the facility, and that the owner of the area will maintain the parking requirements as they see fit and as they, excuse me, as they feel are needed on the site. So with reference to the visitor parking, et cetera. We just in generally feel that this type of a development is really good for the community in the area and the services that are already in existing buildings, and think it's a good project for the city.
Okay, thank you. Just a follow-up question through you, Mayor Masters. Is it close enough to Wascana Park that it had to receive some comments from Wascana, from the Provincial Capital Commission?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, it is. I'll refer that question, though, to Ms. Dawson as to what the actual comment feedback was.
Through you, Mayor Masters, the comment was that it didn't meet the 13-meter threshold, but there was no further recommendation or considerations. But we knew that.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Masters, just a few comments. I want to say that I do support this project. It is in Ward 1, and I'm familiar with that area. I think that will add tremendously to that area. It's a beautiful design, following with the requirements, I believe, of that area, the architectural design, and it fills an important need. So I have not personally received any concerns raised with me from residents. I did read the comments in the report, but I do think that Mr. Reme answered them quite successfully. He answered all the questions about the concerns that had been raised. So I would like to, I strongly support this project. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stanichuk? Seeing no further questions from council, I'll ask Councillor Nelson, did you wish to close off debate? No, that's fine. Thank you. Clerks, could you please call the vote? Councillor Stanichuk, could we get your vote verbally, although I believe you're in favor?
Yeah.
As you just
I
said.
am in favor, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Masters, with respect to the recommendation, it is approved in a vote to 9-0, with all members present voting in favor, with councillors Findura and Mole absent from today's meeting.
Thank you very much to the clerks. Moving on, we'll now consider item CM 22-29, the 2021 Annual Reserve Report. Can I have a member of administration present the report? Thank you. Mr. Lacey.
Good afternoon, through you, Mayor Masters. So before you is the annual reserve report to council, and through bylaw, administration is required to provide you an annual report on the status of our reserves. Reserves are monies that are authorized by City Council to be set aside for future capital and operating needs. And they're a key component of the city's long-term financial strategy and support the city's priority of achieving long-term financial viability. And reserves continue to provide a mechanism to support the future maintenance of assets, new infrastructure, and the sustainability of city services. So this report provides an overview of our reserve balances as of December 31st and provides a projection over the next 5 years. And the bylaw also requires administration to review the reserve balances against minimum and maximum guidelines for each individual reserve, and where that reserve balance is outside those min-max guidelines, to recommend any actions or provide an analysis why action is not required. In the report, we are recommending the establishment of a new reserve called the Regina Police Services Community Policing Initiative Reserve. Council might remember a couple of years ago in the 21 budget that $600,000 was added to the Regina Police Service budget to support community groups and organizations when they had events and there was additional police presence that were required, and to help then subsidize the provision of those services to those community groups. And so what we've seen here is that the RPS does not necessarily spend all of that money in 1 year, depending on what type of activities are happening. So in years where you have a Grey Cup, there's a significant need there, and in other years it might be lower. So this reserve is kind of, is intended to basically capture those unused funds in a particular year where expenses might be lower than $600,000, and then allow that reserve to be used when activities might require expenditures in excess of $600,000. And so in the 21 year, there was approximately $400,000 that was underspent, which is being recommended to move, once this reserve is established, to move from the Regina Police Services General Fund to this new fund related to the Community Policing Initiative. With that, be happy to answer any questions council might have.
Thank you, Mr. Lacey. Can I get a mover first off? Thank you, Councillor Mancinelli, and the seconder. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. As mover, did you want to go first, Jason?
Thank you very much, through the chair. I appreciate the information and the position. I only have really one question, and it has to do with the fleet reserve and it being above its maximum. Understand the warning given in the information about the upcoming costs that are anticipated. Also keenly aware of the current efficiency review and the many things that take investment to get the efficiencies that are planned. Has there been any thought of using this surplus in this reserve to invest in some of the efficiencies to get further cost reductions going forward?
Great question. Through you, Mayor Masters. So I think this reserve, and I'll maybe make a few comments, and I'll ask Mr. Onrait if he has any additional perspectives around that piece. So, I think it's correct to say as we look at efficiencies in our fleet, we've talked about a ratcheting exercise here that's identified the need for less vehicles, which allows us to reallocate some. That certainly has an impact, and future initiatives as well can have an impact on this reserve balance, or how large that reserve balance needs to be. Because the intent of this reserve is basically to replace like for like. So as current vehicle assets get amortized, that amortization is put into this account, and then when those vehicles need to be replaced, you have the money there to replace them. So as you become more efficient in your usage of vehicles, you should expect less vehicles. That should have an impact on this reserve balance. I don't necessarily know, we've thought about, if I understood your question correctly, do you take money out of this reserve to undertake specific efficiency initiatives? And so I think, well, the reserve could potentially be used for that, and we'd have to come to council for approval for that. I think typically some of those efficiency initiatives are just through general kind of operating process overview, and I don't necessarily know if they'd require access to this reserve. But maybe I'll ask Mr. Onrait if he has additional comments and perspective.
Thank you. Through the chair. So I think, as we've looked at the reserve and looked at forecasting out what we're going to be doing in terms of electric vehicles and the cost differential between where we are today in the replacement of current fleet and flipping that over to replacement of electric fleet, there's a substantial difference. The one thing we are looking at right now is, because of the delay with the manufacturers, we're having a look at 2023, 2024, to see what the impact is in not being able to get electric vehicles. Fleet supply is going to be at a minimum. What the manufacturers are telling us, both GM and Ford, is that they will be supplying the retail market, which to them, there's rationale for because they make more money. So they're going to supply that market and make sure that market has good inventory before they start building fleet, pardon me, fleet equipment into whether it's municipalities or large corporations. So we're looking to see what the impact is going to be on the reserve for purchases that we assumed were going to be made in 2023. And some of the conversation around that is whether or not we wouldn't consider, depending on the availability of hybrids, whether or not we wouldn't feed some hybrids into the model. So we're working very closely with finance, with our fleet manager, and also with Mr. Kurtz.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And just to follow up to make sure I have a correct understanding, the state of our fleet right now is such that we have excess units available to us, not all being used. Instead of purchasing new units, currently we're using a ratchet mechanism to use up those excess units that are excess. Yep. And with that, it puts out the date of purchase off in a future date. If I understand the sustainability aspect of our fleet correctly, the first rule of sustainability is you don't replace something unless it's been used up first. So our move to electric will only come after we use up the excess gas vehicles we currently have in our fleet that we're putting forth for this reserve. With that in mind, and knowing the state is going forward from the excess, as you guys are budgeting and looking over this, I would very much appreciate if the lens of trying to see if that money could be freed up for investment in other efficiencies to free up more cash for both operations having to perform as well as residents, if that could be looked at through that lens, please. Thank you. And also, if you could correct me on any of my understandings of the concept of sustainability as it applies to our fleet, as well as my understanding of the units available and the ratchet mechanism. I want to make sure I have a good understanding of that with the questions I asked. Is that correct?
Through the mayor. That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Onright. Mr. Lacey, your mic's still on, just so we're clear. Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you. I have a few questions about the proposed reserve for the community policing initiative, namely what sorts of events get subsidized and whether we should continue subsidizing those events to that extent. Through the mayor, my question is, should I leave those questions to discussion of the proposed police budget, or would it be better to raise those now?
So through you, Mayor Masters, we can certainly have the conversation now as it relates to the reserve balance. You will find that amount in the police budget when we talk about the budget in December, as it's kind of in their base now.
Sure. Maybe
So we can start, and then it might become, as we get into this, perhaps when the RPS are here, there might be more an informed discussion on that piece.
This is my first question through the mayor is, what sorts of events get subsidized police presence at them?
Okay. So through you, Mayor Masters, and I'm just going to speak in general terms because I don't portray to be an expert on this, but when the budget was initially brought forward in 2021, there's a number of community events that happen out there. So I'm going to use the Folk Festival as an example, where as they plan for that event and engage with the Regina Police Service, there might be an identified need that there needs to be additional officer patrols as an example. And so historically and typically what would happen if there was an identified need for that to proceed, that it would be that nonprofit organization that would pay for that additional police service. And so that would be an example of one. Grey Cup is another example that happens occasionally where as Grey Cup undertakes and the Grey Cup committee plans for that, there's a need for additional police presence. And so typically that additional funding is charged to that organizing group. And so the intent of these funds was recognizing that, things like Folk Festival, Grey Cup, and other type of things are important for the community, important for the vibrancy of the community. And these nonprofit groups from time to time are challenged with having that additional cost in their budget to provide that resourcing that's required for those events. And so this funding going to the RPS was basically in recognition of that and to help defray or defer some of the costs by those groups so we can see these type of events continue in our community.
It's a follow-up question. My assumption is if police believed, RPS generally believed, their presence was needed at an event, they would just attend that event free of charge as part of their normal practice. And so I guess my assumption is the sort of events we're subsidizing here are ones that RPS doesn't think their attendance is required at, but the organizer would like them to attend, and that's why they have some partial cost. Is that accurate?
So through you, Mayor Masters, and this might be where others, I'm looking across the table here, of my colleagues might have more information around this piece, but my understanding that isn't necessarily an option for the RPS. I do know, for example, I do think that some of these events where there's alcohol at those events require certain liquor permitting. They have to get a liquor permit, for example, for those events. And I do know, for example, that sometimes to get that permit, there are requirements to have certain security secured for those type of events. And so there's a cost to the organizers then to ensure. And I don't think that's atypical for just the Regina Police Service. I believe that you see this in other communities as well, where those types of events are held, that cost of that event is paid for by the event organizers, not the community at large, i.e. through the tax base. And so I don't think that's I think that's a fairly common thing you see, and I think in some cases it's actually a requirement for those community organizers. And I speak from my time when I was with the Saskatchewan Liquor and Gaming Authority, that we would at times have a requirement that there needed to be a presence there that the organizer had to pay for and ensure was in place.
Yeah. Maybe just a comment, and we can have a more detailed discussion, is it does seem to me offhand, for example, if I'm hosting an event and need security, that's just part of running the event, and that should be borne by the event or community organization rather than by the taxpayer generally. But I think maybe we can have more discussion. But I appreciate Mr. Lacey's explanation, and that makes sense, actually. But I might have more questions in December about that.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor LeBlanc. Councillor Stevens.
Great, thank you. Just want to get a clarification on the time frame we're talking about with this report. It's 2021, so this would include all the expenses up to December 31st, correct? So nothing in the subsequent year. Okay.
Yes, through you, Mayor Masters. So this is for 2021, and so the 2022 and forward are projections.
Okay.
Typically, we'd like to bring, I'll be honest, I would like to bring this report forward much sooner than in November. It's because of resource constraints and other priorities. We're a little late getting it here.
Okay.
I'm hoping in the future we'll get it here in a much more timely fashion.
Okay, thank you. This might be a bigger policy question related to the Social Development Reserve. We've had conversations about it in regards to sustainability, money coming out, money coming in, leaving. There is money in the Social Development Reserve, but its long-term future seems to be in question. Perhaps you could clarify that and talk a little bit about the sustainability of the money in there and how that money is actually, how it populates that reserve.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question through you, Mayor Masters. So the Social Development So through you, Mayor Masters. So the Social Development Reserve has been used historically to fund the Housing Incentive Policy Program. And so what you see in the report really here is the reserve is really used as kind of as a cash flow balancing mechanism. So you might approve 2.5 million worth of housing incentive program applications, but it might take a number of years for the successful applicants to complete their project and actually get the money. So that's in part why you need the reserve, is to balance that. Historically, the reserve, and because the reserve is primarily used to fund the housing incentive policy program, we haven't had a long-term funding source for the housing incentive policy program. So, you know, historically, you've been transferring funds from other reserves to basically fund the HIP program overall. Recognizing this, a couple of years ago, Council has begun a process, a multi-year process, to build into the general operating budget funding so that the HIP program is fully funded. So I believe we get there in the next couple of years. And once that happens, this reserve is really kind of used to just track approvals and to manage that cash flow of when those HIP payments are actually made versus when they're approved. I think in the meantime, you're going to continue to see through the budget process how we try to find other sources of funding to fully fund HIP.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a question about other sources of revenue possibilities. As an example, I had a community organization talk about how the private sector and other levels of government could feasibly help financially support initiatives around housing, for example. Could the city develop or use this reserve as a pot of money that, say, the province or the federal government or the private sector could contribute to with certain conditions that would help us finance certain social development objectives? So legally, could it be a bigger pot of money that other sources of government could contribute to help finance HIP, homelessness initiatives, and so on?
So through you, Mayor Masters, you know what, I would say offhand that, you know, any sources of funding that are external to our tax base and user fees would be welcomed. And I think certainly if that was Council's desire to direct those funds to a particular reserve to then be used upon Council approval to fund initiatives consistent with that reserve, that would be acceptable.
Okay, thank you. My next question relates to the community investment grants. It shows a surplus. It suggests in the report that we're likely to be on balance by the end of 2022. When I see a surplus in there, I also see unmet community demands, whether it's harm reduction. We know that there's at least twice as much requested of harm reduction than we allocate. There's greater demands on the social development stream specifically than we allocate. By the end of 2022, are we kind of breaking even? Or is there an opportunity through the budgeting process to allocate more funds, at least on a one-time basis, to other community grant initiatives?
So sorry, maybe I'll just ask for a clarification through Mayor Masters. Is the question, could we, similar to your previous question, find a funding source to flow more funds into this reserve, and as a result then have an opportunity for additional expenditures out of it? Or is the question more about with the balance, could you use up the balance?
Yes.
It's the second piece. Thank you for that. I don't want to put Ms. Bryden on the spot. Ms. Deridich. So I will refer that question to Ms. Deridich, who's joining us online.
Thank you. For you, Mayor Masters. Yes, there have been at times that council has added one-time funding to the grants program, and we have then been able to use that funding to fund new initiatives for that year. So I would say, yes, if that's something that council chose to do, that they could redirect funding from the reserve back into the community investments program in a specific stream area to allocate for that year out to the community.
Okay. Through the chair, in terms of what would be procedurally appropriate, would now be the time to do that or through the budgeting process?
So through you, Mayor Masters, I mean, my advice would be is to make those decisions when you have the overall budget in front of you and you're making trade-off and balancing considerations. I think would be the appropriate time, and that's only about a month away.
Yeah, thank you. Next question through the chair relates to the utility reserve. It's $20.3 million in the surplus, quote unquote, because I know every dollar in there is accounted for. My question is, just to be clear on where I'm going with it, the report says that there are projects that will be accounted for in terms of that money being used in the future. It doesn't specify. But let's say I wanted to prioritize investing in, for instance, the lead service replacement. Let's say I wanted to advance a program like they have in Saskatoon where there's a 60-40 split with the private side. So theoretically, if I wanted to use that surplus to invest in a standing priority related to the utility revenue model, would you be able to tell me, not necessarily on the spot, but what kind of projects could be delayed? What would be the implications? If I wanted to use some of that money to help offset the cost for residents when they're replacing the private side lead service connections, as an example.
Through you, Mayor Masters, I will refer that question to Mr. Onright.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters. So when we look at the 25-year model, you are correct, Councillor. There is a list of projects. Those projects, as we have discussions around growth of the city, those projects are aligned with growth or can also be aligned with higher risk areas where infrastructure is 80 to 100 years old and actually need to be replaced because there's far greater risk if you don't. So every time we pull something out of the model in terms of finances, that does impact which projects need to get delayed. And it's about, it's the timing of those projects. So a project that is on the capital list within the next 5 years, if you pull $10 million, $8 million out of the actual model, then that will push some of those critical projects, because that's usually what's in the short term. It's more critical projects that are deemed necessary to keep the infrastructure in operational repair, to where we're not turning up streets because of unplanned work.
Okay.
So it is about, it definitely is about the money, and that does impact the project. So you may not do the project, you're going to push it out, and there's risk in some of the areas in doing that. So it's to understand what that risk is.
Okay, thank you. I guess just as foreshadowing, there's 2 points there. I'll probably reach out to staff to inquire about in greater depth leading up to the budget. One would be the utility reserve surplus. The other would be the community investment grant reserve. So I'll follow up about that, but that was helpful. Final question, just a final one about the police, the RPS, the special event reserve here. Would this, because it's being taken from another pot of money, does this mean on an annual basis that we wouldn't have to necessarily include that as a standing line item in the RPS budget? So if we know that there's, I don't know, $500,000 in this reserve, this community policing initiative reserve, would that mean that we don't really need to include it necessarily as a line item in future budgets if that reserve in particular is in a surplus position?
So through you, Mayor Masters, I guess I'd make a couple of comments. One, I think the intent here by setting up the reserve is to ensure that over a period of time, that the funds that were intended for this initiative are being used for this initiative, reflecting on the fact that in some years the expenditure is going to be higher than the amount of funding being provided, and other years it might be lower. And I think certainly as that reserve builds, if it gets to its maximum, I guess there's opportunities to have questions about how those funds are being used. I guess I just remind Council when it comes to the RPS budget at the end of the day, Council is approving the overall budget, not individual line items within that budget. And so for Council more broadly, I think Council members need to be mindful of that when it comes to the RPS budget, it's basically an up or down vote on the overall budget. You're not voting on individual line items like the civic budget of the city.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Stevens. Councillor Zakidniak.
Thank you. So I just want to clarify about the RPS reserve. So I understand that this reserve would be annually, it would be funded by the existing annual budget item of $600,000. And the proposal is to transfer $400,000 from, that was left from 2021. Do we know is there a projected possible transfer to that reserve from 2022? Do we have that information?
So to you, Masters, we do not. That'd be a question of the RPS.
Okay. There is, just to ensure I understand, there is no other budget implications because this is an existing line item that would instead go into this new reserve instead of just the general RPS budget. So there's no other budget implications at this time.
So to you, Mayor Masters, that's correct. There is no other budget implications. And I just might note that, I know when there's been past discussions with the RPS about their budget, there has been questions about what happens when there's unused funds. And I think this is their response to addressing that. So, I think it in part addresses past questions and concerns Council has had. But it has no impact on the budget, as I've talked about the base before. That $600,000 is in the RPS's base budget.
Okay. Thanks. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Zakidniak. Councillor Manson, no, I apologize. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you very much. Just in regards to the winter road maintenance reserve, and then we have the 2021 activities, it's draw to fund operations. Can someone elaborate what that means?
So, thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters, I might make a few comments and then ask Mr. Onright if he has additional comment. But as is noted in this report for 2022, we are anticipating to draw down the reserve to a zero balance. And that's just in part because of the number of significant snow events we've seen in 2022 compared to what we have in the budget. That's the intention of the reserve, knowing you can't accurately predict in any given year the number of snow events you'll see, although we do budget for kind of like an average that we've seen over the past 5 years. Mr. Onright, any additional comment?
Through you, Mayor Masters. So previously that reserve was quite a bit higher for a number of years.
Yes, I remember that.
And then I believe it was in 2017, there was a conscious decision when we had to go through 2 budgets in the 1 year. Some money was pulled out of that reserve and the limits were reset.
That's right.
We look at a 5-year average in terms of snowfall and snow events. And as Mr. Lacey has indicated, this past year, we had more than we normally would have seen. We're going to draw that reserve down. I believe there was about $1.8 million in the reserve. and that will be drawn down because our budget of, I believe, is around 8.5 million is going to be exhausted on top of requiring another 1.8 million. We have, in the forecast for 2022, we had forecasted one more major snow event in the fall, which, as everybody is well aware, has just happened.
Yeah.
So we're really hoping we don't have to go through this again, or it may end up putting additional strain on our financial model for 2022.
Okay.
And then that reserve usually is built, has been built in the past by excess operational money out of winter road maintenance, then moves over into that reserve at the end of the year as finance brings the numbers forward.
Okay, thank you. You know, I remember when we had, it was like in excess, it was 9 million, then it went down to 6 million, and then we found that we were getting no snow. Well, now we're back to getting snow. So I guess the next step, so if we are needing to increase that reserve, when does administration do that?
So, through you, Mayor Masters, we'll have a look at it. We are watching it very closely in terms of operational costs, and what kind of historical data is telling us. So if we see a trend, and I would suggest we would not make a knee-jerk reaction adjustment after 1 year. We would watch that over the next year, and if needed, we would have to come back to council in the 2024 budget and require more money on the operational side, so to bump the $8.5 million up.
Okay, good, thank you. Yeah, I think, just a comment, I know we did take money from there, moved it because of the no snow, it was quite excessive, but seeing now the value of having the dollars there when you do need them, and then to revamp it. But, yeah, I'm okay with that as long as I think we seriously look at that, so we are prepared. And one other question. Can I just make a comment in regards to Councillor LeBlanc's question regarding the police? I remember that conversation when the events, and one of the things came was the nonprofits that don't have a lot of the money to pay for the police presence that they need there. They may come and say, we don't need that kind of safety out there, we can hire our own security. But many times police know, again, identifying if there is certain individuals or things that they may get tips off that could happen around those events that the average citizen wouldn't know. And so they felt that they have to be at those events. And I think that sometimes those events may not be able to happen because of the cost of that. So of course we want them to happen. These nonprofits want to, you know, pride parade, like that goes on and on, right? We want them to, but some of those could be, you know, hindered because of the cost of that. So that's why this fund was started. I remember the conversation as well. So just want to throw that in there. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bresciani. Any other members of council? I have some questions. Is wastewater included in the general utility reserve?
Through you, Mayor Masters, so the general utility reserve, I do believe wastewater would be included, yes.
Yeah.
How much does a wastewater renewal cost?
Sorry, Mayor Masters, wastewater.
A treatment plant. How much does a treatment plant cost to replace or renew? I think that's what we call the Buffalo Pound one, is a renewal. But if I need wastewater expansion or a wastewater treatment facility, how much does that cost? Ballpark.
I would say expansion on the current plant is going to be anywhere between 75 and 100 million.
So I guess my curiosity is into the min-max on the general utility reserve, because you're asking not to transfer the 20 million out. I completely appreciate that, considering how much everything costs. But in terms of the maximum on the general utility reserve that we've attached? We've said allowable is 90 million. Is that reflective of the costs of renewal, expansion, or replacement?
Through you, Mayor Masters, I don't believe the expansion is in that projected.
No, I appreciate that. Go ahead, Mr. Lacy.
So, through you, Mayor Masters, good question, makes me think a little bit. I would have two comments there. We're due to come back with every 4 or 5 years, we're to come back and look at the min-max and determine whether changes are required. And so I'm not certain, but I'm guessing when these min-max ranges were initially put in place, expansion of the water treatment plant wasn't within a 5-year time horizon. I think that is changed with some of the large economic activity we're seeing happening here in the next 4 or 5 years. So that's point one, I would say. The second point is something like an expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. Part of that would likely be funded under our current model from SAF fees. And so that would be in addition to whatever funds you'd be pulling out of the utility reserve. So, you know, I think it's a piece that it's not in there right now. I think that's fair to say. And I think as we look at changing our min-max and looking at how you would fund such a plant, it's probably something that we should be looking at when we do a review.
Thanks for picking up what I was putting down. Mr. Lacy, but I guess my question is, you know, I'm just looking to sort this out in my head. Our water utility, in terms of renewal and all that kind of stuff, is a self-funded model, is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Masters, the utility model is we say it's a self-funded model, and we do believe it is, yes.
Okay, and so wastewater is included in that self-funded model? Okay, have to test that theory. It'd be fun. There is a note on page 3, which speaks to 59% of our reserves are self-sustaining reserves, that operating reserves account for 24%, and capital reserves represent 17% of the balance. Does that ratio lead into a $500 million funding gap on asset renewal?
So,
here's what I found.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure Siri has the answer, but I'd be fascinated to know what she has to say.
Twice has happened to me here today. So through you, Mayor Masters, you know, as we've talked about here, we have a significant infrastructure deficit. And when you look at how you're going to fund future capital projects, in part to address that deficit, you really have 3 sources of funding. You have capital reserves, you have the ability to, well, I should say 4, finance it through debt, seek third-party funding, or seek it through the tax base or the mill rate, increasing rates. And so I think you see in every municipality different approaches to how you're going to fund that deficit and which of those 4 levers you're going to use. I think every municipality, as well, as challenged as we are, that gap is so big that we're going to have to approach it in a long-term phased approach. And so I don't think you can address that gap entirely through reserves. I think what you do see is you see things like the fleet replacement reserve being used, for example, to ensure, as I mentioned earlier, that we have funds to replace our vehicles when they need replacement. My understanding is before my time, that was not the case here, is that we did not have a fleet replacement reserve that fully funded vehicle replacements, and significant work was done many years ago to ensure we have a reserve now that pretty much allows us to replace our that asset through reserves. I think that what that speaks to is there was a very thoughtful plan put in place to establish and eventually fund a reserve that ensured you didn't have that gap in your fleet. I think the broader question is with our other assets, what is the appropriate approach to address that over the long term? And I don't have an answer for you here today on that. That's a significant gap that I think we try to manage through a 5-year capital plan. But do we have a 25-year plan on how we're going to do it and how reserves are going to get us there? I'd say today we don't.
So for fleet, we came up with a plan to ensure its replacement. But for $15 billion worth of assets, we didn't do the same thing in the same time frame. Have I got that right?
I would say through your Mayor Masters that every year the city makes those balancing decisions. And yes, historically we've gotten to where we've gotten to because we haven't fully funded or established a mechanism that past generations were paying for assets that future generations are now going to have to replace.
Thank you, Mr. Lacey. And again, I'm sure we've established some of these reserves, and some of these reserves have been established elsewhere. I'm not really sure on the analysis. Do we need all of these reserves, or should we have other ones that you recommend? I didn't see any analysis on that.
So, no, that's a great question as well, through you, Mayor Masters. So, and I'm going by memory now. The last time we did kind of a reserve review of our mins and maxes, we also did look at how many reserves we had and whether the number of reserves we had were appropriate. And our findings from 3 or 4 years ago is yes, we were within, there's a wide range, once again, but we are clearly within that range and have a reasonable number of reserves based on that analysis. Once again, we are due to do that broader review again, and that'll be something we look at again to see if we're still in the right place.
Okay, thank you for that. Intensification infrastructure reserve was 0 in 2020 and 0 in 2021. Was there not a balance forward in the intensification pot of money that had been charged up until the removal of the intensification levy? Sorry, I'm on page 5.
Sorry, just give me a quick second. So, through you, Mayor Masters, I'm just trying to find that reserve, sorry. There it is. So through you, Mayor Masters, I might make just a few comments and then ask Ms. Bryden if she has any additional comment. So I just want to make sure I understand your question correctly. The intensification infrastructure reserve is a relatively new reserve that was struck when we changed how we were going to fund the intensification levy, if I could call it that. And so that is a new reserve. You're right. Right now it's reflecting a zero balance because it was newly established. I think your question is what about intensification levies we collected in the past, which would be in deferred revenue is where it would typically reside.
As in deferred revenue, as in we haven't collected it?
No.
Or we're not realizing it?
You've collected it and you haven't realized it yet.
But we haven't moved it into this intensification
We have not
reserve.
moved it into the reserve by the looks of it here. And maybe I'll ask if the financial services team here has any additional comment. And while I'm doing that, I might introduce to members of council here, we have a new director of financial services that started here a couple of weeks ago. So I'm not anticipating her answering the question, but I just want to introduce her to council and she can refer it to her colleagues. Ms. Kim Krywuluk is our new director of financial services.
We might
I
have
just
you
want
try
her,
that. Yeah.
and I got to work on that last name. It's got to roll off the tongue better. But I'd like to just introduce Kim to you. And Kim, I'll leave it to you whether you want to direct that question to either Irene or Keely.
Welcome, Kim. Your microphone is on.
Oh, thank you. I will direct the question to Keely.
Yeah, thank you. So through the chair, we have worked with budget in regards to forecasting the revenue piece of that into the future from 23 to 27. So that will be reflected in the budget book you will see shortly. In regards to the expenses that may have been already incurred, we've been working with Ms. Bryden's team in order to quantify that to correctly, I guess, reflect it in our forecast.
Thank you, Ms. Keeley. Ms. Bryden, your microphone is on because my understanding was, if I'm correct, pulling a number out of the air, there was, I don't know, was it $1.8 million sitting in an account, in the deferred revenue account? So does that revenue now not transfer into intensification if the purpose and the intention of it was to actually work on projects needed for intensification?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters, that is something that we'll have to take away and address, certainly for the, I guess, for the budget conversations.
Mr. Lacey, I understand from an accounting perspective, putting deferred revenue into a reserve may be complicated, may not be. It's like a tech solution to me. Sounds easy.
No, so through you, Mayor Masters, I'll be honest, that is something that we'll have to look into on how we reconcile that as we've moved to a reserve here and a different way of collecting those fees. We'll have to look into that and report back to council members and how we'll address that money that's sitting in the deferred revenue currently.
Thank you. And I apologize, Mr. Lacey, if this is a reiteration of an answer given to Councillor Bresciani. The Winter Maintenance Road Reserve is looking that there's a drawdown of $357,000, I see. Is that, how will that hold for the year? I didn't quite understand. Mr. Onrait, I didn't quite understand the answer. Is the 1.8 going to be depleted in order to balance the budget based upon the snow events this year? Or is the 357 the drawdown so far and the 1.8 stands? Sorry, Mr. Lacey, go ahead.
So through you, Mayor Masters, so the $357,000 relates to a drawdown that occurred in 2021. So we did have to dip into the reserve slightly in 2021 to balance the winter road maintenance budget. Just due to the number of snow events we're having in 2022, we're going to have to draw that reserve down again and in fact draw the entire remaining amount of 1.8 million out of it, given winter road maintenance expenditures have exceeded, as Mr. Onrait indicated, our budget of $8.5 million. So we're withdrawing it all because of the amount of expenditure we've had clearing streets.
Yeah, no, and I understand. I'm curious about something. Is it possible for administration on budget line items like this, which actually, this is one line item, anything dependent upon weather is one line item that can make or break a balancing of a budget. Is there some way of keeping more of a real time, because I understand this is November of 2022 and the information before us is from 2021. Is there some way of a real time, a more real time, accounting time, for letting the public know and keeping them abreast? Because I get asked about this and I, you know, in all fairness, I say, well, it's probably not looking good. But from a taxpayer perspective, we are legislated by law to balance a budget, and this is one of those line items, and there's a couple others, but this is one of them that can skew it favorably or quite negatively.
No, through you, Mayor Masters, you know, the mechanism typically in place is providing, usually we provide a mid-year forecast and a third quarter forecast to council. Typically, as part of those forecasts, we'd be flagging those expenses. This year, given where we're at in the year, that will be released in the budget here next week. Included in the budget is that third quarter forecast. Is there and should there be the opportunity for us to providing those forecasts earlier? Yes, definitely yes, and that certainly is our goal for 2023.
Thank you for that. I'm fine with the graphic on the website. I'm just saying that whether we're on budget or not, it's a simple visual thing that is communicated then and transparent to the public. Again, those budget line items that have the tendency to tip one way or the other, I think are significant in terms of transparency to the public. I may have one more question. Planning and sustainability Planning and Sustainability Stabilization Reserve. Can you give me an example of a project that we're drawing down money for on that?
Through you, Mayor Masters, I'll ask Ms. Bryden to provide comment.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The projects that recently, the larger projects that have drawn down on that reserve were the installation of the City View software, the Zone Forward bylaw renewal. Those are projects that would have been funded through that reserve.
Right. Thank you for that. And so, should council be concerned in terms of its current balance?
Thank you, through the chair. So the funding for that reserve comes from the charges of development fees and permit fees. Development permits, not SAF fees, and building permit fees. And so those fees have not changed since, I believe, 2012. There was a review done on the whole area that supports that work, and we are at the tail end of implementing all of the suggestions from that review. And with the introduction of our measures and KPIs that will be coming forward in January, we'll have good reporting statistics, and we will be doing a review of those fees, et cetera, it'll come forward probably end of Q1 of 2023.
Thank you, Ms. Bryden. So there would have been some modeling done for a minimum and a maximum, is that correct? To set a minimum of 1.7 and a maximum of 13 million, there would have been some modeling done for min and max. Sorry. And Ms. Bryden, maybe this is better set for Mr. Lacey.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Masters, I can't remember specifically, but there was looking at other jurisdictions, looking at best practices in other jurisdictions, looking at what the historical range of the model of reserves were in the past here at the city. So we looked at a number of different pieces of information to arrive at those min-max, but I would characterize it as, when we looked at what we see happening in other jurisdictions, what historically happened here, we've come up with these ranges which we believe reflect best practice.
Thank you for that. I'm down to second, so I'm just going to add in that if that modeling is based on an assumption, there has to be a fee attached to a volume. And so how does that trend look like since that has been established? I'd be fascinated to know, because it's not just about fees, it's also about volume. If there's no development, there's no things. Last question. There's some recommendations not to remove some of the balances. What do we do with the ones that are below their limits?
So, through you, Mayor Masters, so we have 3 reserves below their limits, and I'm going to start with the smallest one, work my way up to the biggest one. So the cemetery reserve is below its minimum limit. This was an area that we looked at in the past year. The reason the reserve is below its minimum limit is we had some major expenditures, capital expenditures at the cemetery. And so we've reevaluated our whole fee model for the cemetery reserves with the intent that large capital expenditures would be funded through the tax base, but after that, the reserve would be the cemetery would be self-funding. So on that, we're on a good track to see that back within its min-max by 2027. We've talked about the planning and sustainability reserve that Ms. Bryden just discussed here with the intent of coming back in the new year. Reviewing that, and I do anticipate that'll include some recommendations around fee structure, and then that does tie into bringing that reserve back into balance. So I'd say work is underway on that piece, and you'll get a report on that later. And then we have the land development reserve, which is below its limit. And this is one where it's below its limit for a combination of factors. We have pulled funds out that are sitting in capital accounts that have not yet been spent. So if you take that into account, would be kind of in a net zero position. Secondly, we've been making investments in land development, and it takes some time to see returns on that piece. I think we have historically been very conservative on what we think those sale amounts will be, just because of the fluctuations in the real estate market. And I think thirdly, this is a reserve where I think it would be worthwhile coming back to council within the year here with some more detailed information around where we see this reserve going more over the long term, because it has been in a negative balance for a number of years. And I do think there are some things that we need to look at more closely with respect to this reserve and report back to council on those findings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lacey. I appreciate the answers today. Councillor Mancinelli, you want to close off debate?
No, I have nothing
That's
further.
good. Clerks, please call the vote. It's a receive and file, Council.
Stadnichuk in favor.
Thank you, Councillor Stanichuk.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mayor Masters. The motion passes 9-0 with all members in attendance voting in favor.
Thanks very much to the clerks and to administration. Council, we've reached 2:31. We'll take a mandatory 15-minute break. See you back here at 2:46. I'll call the meeting back to order. I believe I have quorum as Councillor Stanichuk is on the line. Next up is Board of Police Commissioners. With respect to item CR 22-120, Regina Police Service 2023-2024 Operating and Capital Budget. Can I have someone move this report be tabled to the December 14th, 2022 City Council Budget Meeting with the following typographical error corrected? On recommendation number 2, the net operating budget should read 103,820,700 instead of 103,764,700. Thank you, Councillors Kidniak, seconded by Councillor Hawkins. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Carried. We'll now consider item CR 22-123, the 2022 Residential Road Renewal Program Update. Deputy Mayor Hawkins, could I ask that you please introduce this report?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be very brief on this. This is the annual report for the Residential Renewal Program, and I'd like to ask the administration, I think it's Mr. Onright, who doesn't appear to be here, to mention any highlights.
Mr. Warren, would you like to, are you presenting? All right.
He's got notes here I can read.
Oh, all right, I'll go anywhere.
There was a counselor cornered me.
I hear that happens. I hear that happens. Go ahead, sir. Residential Renewal Program.
Question. Introduction. All right. Let me back up. Through you, Mayor Masters. So the purpose of this report is to provide the 2022 residential road update. Since 2015, administration has brought back annual updates regarding this program. The report provides a brief background of the RRP and coordination of the residential road renewal work by other areas and summarizes the accomplishments as well as look at the planned work for 2023. That's it.
Mayor, I'd only like to point out what council will be aware of. As a result of this program, there is now $12 million indefinitely yearly built into the base budget for residential roads, so we avoid the problem that they had at the start of the program where residential roads are receiving very little attention.
Thank you very much to both Mr. Onright and Deputy Mayor Hawkins. Do any members of council have any questions for administration? Councillor Skidniak.
Thank you. I do have one question from the environmental impacts section, maybe one, we'll see. So I just was wondering if someone could give some more information about the research that administration is conducting on how to quantify emissions produced to road renewal and infrastructure projects.
Through you, Mayor Masters, I'll ask Mr. Warren to provide comment.
Through you, Mayor Masters, can I just get clarification on the question, Councillor Zakiniak?
Sure. So the research, so administration's conducting research on how to quantify emissions. So this is not something that we've previously done, is what I'm assuming, and what, just more information on the research that's being conducted in this area, if you have that.
So through you, Mayor Masters, so some of the conversation around the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions and the impacts that road renewal have on those emissions, the administration is working with our team to understand what those impacts are. So, for example, how does a paved road surface impact greenhouse gas emissions, as well as what are the greenhouse gas emissions that go into the construction of road rebuilding. So there is some work that we need to do around that just to really fully understand both the positive and the negative impacts of that, and that's the type of work that we're looking to do moving forward.
And, okay.
So, through you, Mayor Masters, I'll just add, Mr. Warren's team is working with Mr. Kuntz's area in kind of the research part of this. Mr. Kuntz couldn't join us today. He is at a conference this week. So.
Okay, and so just to follow up, so first of all, is it accurate that we didn't previously calculate these emissions in the past? And so clarification about that. And then also the reason that we are now trying to understand them better is so that for the energy and sustainability framework, to have a full understanding of the emissions. Is that accurate?
Through you, Mayor Masters, that is.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Zakiniak. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you very much. So, thank you for the report. Just want to ask about kind of the lessons learned. So we've contracted some of the work out to do some of these residential roads. How do we hold these contractors accountable to come back for work for repairs? Could be next year. Like, what's the length of time that we have that they can still warranty their work, so doesn't fall on the city taxpayer? Through you, Mayor Masters.
Through you, Mayor Masters, I'll start, and then I'll ask Mr. Warren to further comment. So through the contracts, through the procurement process, it is pretty clear in those contracts as to what the contractor will be responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
Couple of things that have changed over the last couple of years, specifically this past year, is there were changes made in the procurement process that will actually benefit the contractor in the quality and timeliness of their work. And our project managers who are assigned a variety of projects in construction season, they follow up and do the inspections to ensure the contractor is following the contract. There is a holdback on these contracts, so if there are deficiencies at the end and the contractor has not fulfilled full term of the contract, that holdback is held by the city until the deficiencies are cleared. If the contractor does not clear the deficiencies, and the city would have to bring somebody in to clear the deficiencies, that money would not be paid out to the specific contractor originally responsible for the work.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Moving forward, do we have a project list for like next year, the next 2 to 3 years, so we actually can advise residents knowing, because they keep asking when their road's going to get done? How far in advance is that done, and is it done like in a timely, we don't go out every year to look at every road, we've got a process in place now? Through you, Madam Mayor.
Through you, Mayor Masters, over the last 2 years, we've made some internal changes. So the intent is to get to a 3 to 5 year forward-looking plan in terms of capital work in roadways and the utility, and planning between those two departments and our new ISD department in Ms. Bryden's area, to be able to look at those projects further out. We are not currently there. We're working on the 2023 plan right now. That will be finalized here, I would say, in the next 2 months. And then council will be made aware by ward of those projects will be further into February. I think it's important to understand that those projects can move around a bit. Mm-hmm. So, you know, when we do print the list that we determine is going to be the list for 2023, even at that point, depending on what happens with underground infrastructure, we may have to move a few of those projects around. But all in all, in February, we will know what is being done in 2023, with the intent getting to 2 years out and then 3 or 4 years out in our planning. I'm going to ask Mr. Warren to comment further.
Through you, Mayor Masters, Mr. Onrait covered the question well, so I don't have anything further to add.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Councillor Stadnichuk, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Masters. Through you, Mayor Masters, a question regarding the condition of our roads. in the Appendix B, there is an assessment of the condition of the roads, but it's from 2019. And there's a high number of roads in poor condition. The two wards seem to be Ward 1, Ward 8 that have the highest number of roads in poor condition. But then on page 8 of the report, Table 4 mentions that 56 of 65 projects this year were done on roads that were classified as poor. So I assume that we are starting to address that backlog in poor roads that are in poor condition. Can you let me know when you're going to be updating that information so that we can kind of sense how many of our roads are in poor condition still, and when we might get that and in what format? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Masters, I'll ask Mr. Warren to comment.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters. So we do have some data that suggests that the investment in the residential road network has been improving. So for example, in 2020, 78% of the residential road network was rated as fair or better condition, whereas in 2021 it has improved to 81%. The last couple of years, so through COVID, obviously we had to make some operational changes, and we did not collect data on the road network in 2020 or 2021. However, that said, we are back to normal, and we did do the data collection analysis of the road network in 2022, and we are expecting to finalize the condition assessment of the network by the end of this year, so within the next month or two. And that is information that we're actively working on internally in terms of wanting to share that with our residents and make that public. So these are things that we're talking about and hoping to have that available for the public in the near future.
Thank you very much for that answer. Just a follow-up through Mayor Masters. When and in what format will you be providing that update of that information at the end of 2022?
Through you, Mayor Masters, yes, administration is currently talking about how we would like to share that information, but at a high level, we see some graphs and some tables in the report, and we are looking to do something similar, likely, and making that available on regina.ca.
Okay, thank you. Just some other questions. There was information in the report that some contractors were penalized for during the work of some of their projects for either. Well, it doesn't actually say for what reasons they were penalized. Can you give just a bit of a summary of what kind of issues happened and what the process was like in terms of penalizing contractors? I know that Grant Drive, for example, almost all of it was done, and it's a beautiful road now, but there was still some part of it that wasn't done. So through you, Mayor Masters, can I have a response to that?
Through you, Mayor Masters, I'll ask Mr. Warren to comment.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters. As Councillor Statichuk had suggested, obviously we've got, through our procurement process, we have conditions and requirements outlined in the contract, and through our project managers and through our procurement teams, we want to ensure that our contractors are being held accountable to the requirements of the contract. So, I mean, Mr. Onrait had talked about when there's a deficiency, we ensure that we are identifying that with the contractors and that they would be required to go back and repair those deficiencies on their within their own costs. For example, other areas where we sometimes have concerns is around scheduling. So we work closely with the contractors at the awarding of the contract in the early stages to outline a schedule in which they must adhere to completing that work. Some of it is an overall end date, and also some of it is throughout the various phases of the project. So if we've got a situation where a contractor is failing to meet the timelines and the deadlines outlined in the contract, then we can penalize the contractors financially around those missed deadlines. So those are some of the things that we have done and continue to do and work with our contractors to ensure they're meeting the requirements of the contract.
Okay, thank you. And I think, well, actually, there's a question that I missed regarding the assessment of roads, residential roads that are in what condition they're in. Does that table and that graph only cover residential roads? Or does it also, do we have a similar graph for some of the major roads that aren't covered under the residential road renewal program? Through you, Mayor Masters.
Through you, Mayor Masters. So yes, this graph that's in the residential road report is specifically around the residential roads. I don't have the number in front of me. I know it's here somewhere, but which is about 500 or 600 kilometers of our roadway network. We also have similar data on our major road network, and that conversation, that information is somewhat contained in the next report on the street infrastructure renewal program.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, there was reference in the report to an increase, there's a table that shows an increase in, I got to open this up. On page 7, table 3, shows the water infrastructure upgrades that were coordinated with the residential road renewal program. And the table shows that those water connections were higher in 2021 and 2022, so that was like 119 and 100 respectively. Is that because of an increase in replacing some of the lead service connections?
Through you, Mayor Masters. As we plan the residential road renewal program, we are working closely with our friends in water to ensure that we are replacing the underground infrastructure as well. And so some of these graphs talk about the different types of underground infrastructure that we've included in the projects. When you look at the tables and wonder why some of the connection replacements, for example, are increasing over the years, I'd like you to maybe ask you to refer to table 1 on page 5, where it also talks about the investment that has been made in the residential road network since 2015. And in 2015, when the 1% mill rate increase was put to the budget, it took 5 years to get to the full amount of $12 million. You'll see that we finally, in 2019, received the full $12 million, as well as the roughly $4.5 million contribution from the street infrastructure renewal program. So as we ramped up and got additional funding to replace the road network, we were able to do more work. There's a little bit of a spike in 2020, I guess a decrease more in 2020 because of COVID, and we deferred many projects into 2021 when it came to the residential road network. So that's why you'll see the anomaly in 2020.
Okay, thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Stanachek. Councillor Mancinelli.
Thank you very much. Through the mayor, noting that this is a new program as of 2015, and when you start something new, you have to figure out how it works, how to build it. And from 2015 to 2022, we must have found efficiencies. I know you have. You guys have done a great job planning. That fixed $12 million amount that's set aside is now a shrinking amount to perform work with as inflation increases and costs increase. At what point do you think we might have to adjust that amount? I think currently we can still look for efficiency on a new program to offset, but do you have any idea when that starts to become a decreasing amount of output?
Through you, Mayor Masters. So I think one of the things when it was approved by council a few years ago was to change the actual model. So doing the light road repairs, so we're really, the crews are going in and just capping existing pavement. It doesn't deal with drainage issues and does not deal with concrete issues. But that improves drivability on these poor roads. There was no inflation built into the $12 million, so to your point, Councillor, at some point in time, there probably will be a request to come back that would come back to council if the expectation is to continue using the same model moving forward. where additional money would be required to be able to keep up the pace. And I think in the report, it does talk a little bit about that.
I noticed in the report some of the things you've done, such as reusing crushed concrete for fill, and very innovative. Along that line, we recently had an opportunity to talk to an asphalt company for a lease of property through the mayor. In their presentation, they mentioned new processes in manufacturing asphalt and reusing asphalt that greatly reduce costs and emissions. I'm wondering, as we go through this process, are we applying those type of concepts in the work we're doing here as well?
Through you, Mayor Masters, we look at different methods of road repair, and that we have engineers that we send usually annually to an international conference where that is what is discussed amongst many people, many different jurisdictions, and that is across North America. So they bring the information back. The increase of other materials into asphalt material, as you see in the report, that is currently being done by our internal crews. I'll ask Mr. Warren if he has anything further to add.
Thank you, Mr. Honorate. Through you, Mayor Masters, Mr. Honorate is correct, as we are closely connected with both the asphalt and the construction industry when it comes to best practices. I know the vendor that you're talking about, and we in fact met with them the following day to talk about some of their new products, and this is something that we will do on a continuous basis. One of the things that we are focusing on right now is, to your point, is the use of recycled materials in the construction processes. For example, the crushed concrete program. It's a program where contractors, developers, vendors from all over the city can bring concrete rubble, clean concrete rubble, to the landfill free of charge. It's then separated and stockpiled, and we crush that concrete down and create an aggregate that we can use in road building and in alley maintenance and things like that. So this is something that we're really actively doing. It's at a lower cost, and obviously using a recycled material over a non-renewable aggregate source is more preferential and more sustainable. So these are the things that we're actively doing currently, and want to continue to expand on that as we move forward.
Thank you. I really appreciate the efficiencies you're looking for. I appreciate that you're managing to keep the output up in spite of the inflation. But once again, this was a big deal to get off the ground, so I really appreciate it if you let us know when it's time and when we start to fall behind, because people of Regina don't want to fall into poor roads like they had before again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mancinelli. Councillor Nelson.
Just a quick follow-up. You were talking about February, we'll know the road repair for 2023, and that you're working on a 3 to 5 year forward-looking plan. So February, we'll have a list of roads that'll be done in the 2023 year. Is that correct? And then the 3 to 5 year plan, where are we in that process? Through the chair. To you, Madam Mayor, sorry.
Through you, Mayor Masters, I would say the next step in the process internally would be get to a 2-year plan.
Okay. Which will be ready when?
I would hope 2023, towards the end of 2023, we would be projecting out 2024 and 2025 projects.
And I do appreciate that there's always room to change and things happen. I get that. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Just before I turn it back to Councillor Hawken, a couple quick questions. In the report, it does say that the 2023 work, the projects are going to be released in April of 2023. Am I hearing you that you can get them out a bit earlier for the public?
Through you, Mayor Masters. I believe last year we had a few delays because of COVID and having to move some projects from the previous year into 2022. So I'm anticipating by the end of February we will have a list ready to share.
Excellent, thank you. I see that, for 2023 proposal is around 75 projects to move forward. How many on an average, on an annual basis, how many projects that we go to do are contracted out and how many does the city perform itself?
So I believe this year we're in that 75 to 80% were contracted out. And we will look at numbers similar to that for 2023. And that is, you know, some of the projects specifically in water are very specialized. So pretty much all of water projects are contracted out. Our operational areas look after water main breaks and smaller pieces of work, but the majority of water, waste, and drainage is all contracted out.
Excellent, thank you. Do you ever do analysis in terms of what's contracted out? I can see there's some reporting on the site rental projects where 20% were completed in advance, but do we keep track of the contracts in terms of the metrics for how many were successful on time and on budget?
Through you, Mayor Masters, we do. We have more work to be done on that. It's a bit of a manual process to get there, but I'm not sure if Mr. Warren wants to add comment.
Sure. Thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters. As part of the procurement process, we do vendor evaluations at the end of the contract to determine how well they met the conditions of the contract, how well they met the schedule, things like that. Typical productivity, unit cost, things like that. So we do track all of that information and use that, I guess, for one reason, to give that information, to provide that information to our contractors to identify things they do well, things that that from the city's perspective we need to work on. But also as we move forward with future contracts, we use those as our basically an internal. What's the word I'm looking for in the interview? Sorry. Evaluation, basically on the ability to handle these types of projects. So for example, we often get multiple vendors bidding on multiple projects, so we use that information to determine typical productivity levels and to have those conversations with vendors to see if this is something they could actually handle, or is this too much work for one specific season. So we do collect that information and we do use it to try to get the best out of our contract management.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Warren. Thank you, Mr. Onright. Seeing nothing further, Councillor Hawkins, did you wish to close off debate?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Clerks, could I ask you please call the vote? Oh, I don't have a seconder apparently. Thank you, Councillor Mancinelli. Here you go. Now, can we please call the vote? Thanks.
Stavnichuk in favor.
Mayor Masters, with respect to the recommendation, it is approved with a vote of 9-0 with all members present voting in favor.
Thank you very much. We'll now consider item CR 22-124, street infrastructure renewal update. Deputy Mayor Hawkins, could I ask that you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Mayor. This is similar, and I'd like to ask the administration, Mr. Onright, I think, to mention the high points on this, but I have two questions that I want to put that he could maybe address. The first is at page 6. He's dealing with condition trends over time. Number 2, the overall trend from 2013 to present shows a decrease in roads in excellent and good condition. These are major roads. This trend suggests that the current rate of investment to major roads through the SERP is not sufficient to offset deterioration of the major road network. I'm wondering if I could have the administration's observation on that. And then in connection with that, just to go back to the previous report, over time between 2017 and 2022, SERP contributed money to the local roads, 4.5 to 4.7, and then down to 4.6. How is the SERP contribution to local road improvement determined? And if major roads are are deteriorating, will the SERP contribution to local roads be reduced? So those two things.
Through you, Mayor Masters. So the report in front of council, this is regarding the road renewal financial model review. Administration committed to providing information on major road network conditions, the street infrastructure renewal program, and the outcomes of long-term performance analysis. So the city has invested $130 million in this program since 2014, renewing over 90 kilometers of major roadwork. Through a motion from council, 25% of the street infrastructure renewal funding goes towards the residential road renewal. So I think what you see in the report is the what if that $4.5 million was back in the street infrastructure renewal portion, the condition would be improved to where it is today. That being said, if you don't put the 25% in the residential road renewal program, you're going to see a further deterioration in the road network on residential roads. So the gap, you know, and the model for residential roads is built on the 25% being in that program. I think what administration is pointing out is the shortfall on the street infrastructure renewal program, which is our major work. There is a shortfall there, and we need to figure out how we're going to be able to address that.
So, Mayor, through you, could I follow up on that? I mean, it's an arresting sentence to read that the trend of the current rate of investments in major roads is not sufficient to offset deterioration in the major roads. Can we expect to see some kind of report back or some kind of plan to deal with, first of all, how we prevent the major roads from deteriorating, and then secondly, how we can do that without undermining the improvement in the local road situation?
Through you, Mayor Masters. So we are doing some work around that. I'm going to ask Mr. Warren to comment.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters. Councillor Hawkins, you're correct. The recent condition assessments are showing that although the roads in poor condition are decreasing, the roads in good condition are deteriorating into fair condition at a higher rate. So the more a road deteriorates, the more expensive the treatment. I believe just about a month ago, Council heard some information around the state of the infrastructure report and the approximately $137 million gap in the roadway assets over the next 20 years. And we drilled a little bit deeper into that and found that about 70% of that gap was directly attributable to the road network. So that equals about $5 million a year. So I guess to the point, in the case of this report, we haven't traditionally come to council and reported on the program, so we wanted to kind of set the stage and say, you know, talk to council and the public a little bit about, here's the program, here's where the dollars are going when it comes to major roads. Talk about, you know, how we collect the data, how we manage the program, the types of dollars that are spent, and then really look towards the future in terms of how do we create a sustainable model for the future, and absolutely the intention were that at some point we would come back to council with that information.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I'll need a seconder for this.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Stevens.
Great, thank you. I guess if my numbers are correct here, it seems like since 2014 we've spent about $274 million on roads. And there seems to be little indication, especially in the secondary report, that it's actually going to address it in the long term. What does it take then to maintain the roads at a satisfactory level over the long term if we're using your scenario here? And what kind of preventative measures in your estimate actually work successfully in our climate?
Through Mayor Masters, I'll start. I'll talk a little bit about the coordination of projects today versus, how they were done in the past. And I go back, a number of years to how they were planned and how they're planned today. So our future planning, when the project teams, both from water, waste, and drainage, are working with our roadways preservation group, these projects, to maximize the dollars that we have available, those projects are coordinated very carefully. And, the underground work, as soon as we start digging up streets, as you'll see in the graph that is presented in the residential road renewal program, it is extremely expensive when you start replacing underground. And if you don't coordinate it properly and have to go back 3 years later and start ripping the street up. So, I think that's one piece of it. And then I think the change that has been done over the last few years just on the approach to how we deal with poor roads and roads in fair condition is different today than it was then. But I'll let Mr. Warren comment further on kind of what our actual process is.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters. So just to continue with Mr. Honorate's remarks, so as our asset management strategies mature, as different treatment options become available, these are things that we try to incorporate into our programs to maximize the use of the dollars. So we, one of the things that we've really focused on over the last number of years is crack sealing, and that's where we come in for fairly low cost after, I think, typically around 5 years after a road rehab takes place, and make sure that we're filling the cracks that form. We obviously live in a climate that has major differences when it comes to freezing and thawing. We've got high temperatures in the summer, low temperatures in the winter, and we also have a clay soil. And so we are significantly challenged when it comes to the weather and the conditions that we're faced with when it comes to the road network. So the preventative maintenance strategies are key. So yeah, these are some of the things that we'll continue to work on and maximize the ensuring that we're spending the right dollars at the right time.
Thank you. Since we seem to be on this bend of using data to make decisions and comparing to other municipalities, do we have a number that compares Regina per kilometer of road to other regions, whether it's Kelowna or Toronto? In other words, do we have to be spending more per capita on roads than other municipalities simply because of those measures? And then how do we explain that in terms of taxation and costs to residents when it comes to actually maintaining an asset that they seem to prioritize above all else?
Through you, Mayor Masters, there definitely is a difference in comparisons when we're comparing to warmer climates than what we actually deal with in this province. I think in terms of how do we share that information, I think that's a piece that is missing right now in explaining or sharing with the residents of Regina kind of where that dollar value is and the cost to Regina to repair as opposed to other jurisdictions. But it definitely is higher, and it falls right in line with our winter road maintenance conversation.
Great, thank you.
So, do you want to add?
Councillor Stevens?
Oh,
go ahead.
Mr. Warren has a comment.
Mr. Warren, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters. So, I mean, yes, we communicate with other municipalities, and every municipality has a little bit different approach and climate and level of service, or a couple of reasons why there might be some different approaches. But most municipalities, some basic asset management strategies around collecting condition and then achieving the whatever service level target that community expects. When we compare directly to the city of Saskatoon, so they spend approximately $26 million on roads on any given year, 85% of their investment goes into the major roads, 15% into residential roads. And as we've talked about before, there was a major push, 7 years ago to invest in residential roads. So currently, 31 million a year on major roads and residential roads in the city of Regina. It's almost 50-50. So about 47% goes to major roads and 53% goes to residential roads of that typical investment. So that speaks to the the priorities that this community has set out currently, that it's about a 50-50 split. So I mean, anytime we can just continue to work with the community and the residents on the levels of service that they expect, and work with council on what those target and levels of service look like, that's what we continue to try and do.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Councillor Mancinelli.
Thank you. Appreciate the report, kind of scared of the numbers that it dictates out of it. Being part of council for a few years now, I've come to realize, and you've taught me, that when doing road construction, I believe concrete is 10 times the cost of asphalt, if I remember. With that thought in mind, do we always renew these roads with like for like? With such examples as boulevards, concrete boulevards being placed on major roads. I noticed years back we got rid of the boulevards on Broad Street. We just did an Albert Street rebuild. We put beautiful boulevards back up, and I'm going to watch them get torn apart over in the next 2 years doing winter cleanup and maintenance. Do we always build like for like, and is there any efficiency and cost savings we could accumulate by rethinking on how we do these things? Before I give up the mic, one other example, although not on this particular report, would also be within the residential neighborhoods. I note in new neighborhoods, many new neighborhoods are built without sidewalks, or sidewalks only on one side of the street. When we do our upgrades and our rebuilds in our interior city, we always replace both sides of the street with sidewalk on both sides. And then a month later, we talk about parking problems and cycling infrastructure problems and costs of rebuilding roads. At what point do we re-examine how we're investing in what we're building and see if we really have to build like for like, or if we can start to plan out for a more economical rebuild situation in the future?
Through you, Mayor Masters, defer to Mr. Warren.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Masters. I mean, under these road programs, we typically do replace like for like. But I mean, obviously, as we look to the future, we work closely with our partners in sustainable infrastructure when it comes to the addition of bike lanes, active transportation requirements. So definitely there are things that we can do to maximize the use of the space. There are also certain things that we have to keep in mind and consider. The example of the center medians is a great example. In some of these circumstances, the traffic medians are in place for traffic safety to ensure, for example, cars are turning left into oncoming traffic, depending on the number of lanes and things like that, access and egress points into businesses and commercial corridors. So these are some of the things that we consider. And where the impacts, where the traffic safety analysis is lower, then there's opportunities to have, for example, a painted center median as opposed to a concrete median. In other cases, the traffic safety risk sometimes is deemed too high or too substantial to implement that risk. In the case of Albert Street, there was rail requirements around the railway tracks to ensure that we're meeting the safety compliance with the railway regulations. So there are things that we definitely consider when we're renewing a corridor or location. And Mr. Otteray spoke a little bit about earlier that as an organization we are really expanding how we integrate projects and how we think about the future and how we can promote the priorities of this community and a sustainable community. So those are things that we are doing and will continue to do.
Thank you. I hope the comments were brought in the conversation, and I hope they have a little bit of impact. Otherwise, maybe it's time to discuss it with my compadres here for motions. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mancinelli. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you very much. So, who puts in the road originally? So when these roads are built, who builds those? Through you, Madam Mayor.
Through you, Mayor Masters, are you referring to new development?
Mm-hmm.
Developers.
Developers do, okay. And are they, so I'll use Chuka as an example because I know that well. is, what's the warranty that we have on roadways? Is there any warranty that we have that we, that before it turns over to the city, or how does that work?
Through you, Mayor Masters, I'll ask Mr. Warren to comment.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Masters. For the purposes of renewing an existing roadway, we typically have a 1-year warranty. If you're speaking about the development warranty, I'm not sure if that's, the development of a brand-new road, I'm not sure if that warranty period is a little bit different.
Through you, Mayor Masters, I believe it's when it's handed over to the city. So when the city, at a certain point in time, it's like a park. The developer builds the park, and then there's a point in time, once the development is moving along, it gets handed over to the city, and then it becomes the city's responsibility. I think at that time, the city takes complete ownership when it's handed over.
And is there any, at that time, before it's handed over, that there's any check and balance to look to say that, that the roadway was not built properly, or it's got too many dips already for a year-old road?
Through you, Mayor Masters, so the roads and infrastructure are built to city standards, and I believe as these projects move along, they are followed up on to ensure they're being built to city standards. That's my understanding. And I'm not sure if Ms. Bryden has further comment, but that's on the planning and development piece before it comes over to operations.
Right. Okay. I guess that, you know, I think a takeaway is that when I go down Chuk at the end, and I've had many complaints that the road, it's like you've actually built in a whole bunch of speed bumps, and it's rare and it's only in one area. But the concern being is that we are going to have to now go back and do the work on that. And the road is not really that old. It's a brand new area. I think that just a takeaway that we need to ensure that, and there's a couple roads in that area, in that corner, some which are residential. This is an arterial which we're talking about, but I think that there is some, I would like staff to make sure that we are looking at that, and we're ensuring that developers, whoever they are putting in these roads, are following the necessary guidelines. Otherwise, we, the taxpayers at the end, have to go back and fix those.
And we can definitely follow up with our internal team so Ms. Bryden and I fully understand the process in the handoff. I believe what I've outlined is the way it is done. I'm just not sure of the planning and development process as the project is moving through.
Okay, thank you. And just the last question in regards to, I agree with Councillor Mancinelli when we talk about the center medians and looking to if those are absolutely needed. Again, when we are a winter city, we see that snow removal gets pushed up on a lot of those, becomes very narrow, especially on some of the arterial roadways or collector roadways as well. I did read in here as some of the pathways, kind of, when the roadway needs to be done, you'll look at it holistically and you'll actually go and do some of the pathways that may be needed to do. The only thing that I would say with that is just if it's in a new area and there is no pathway yet, that means that, and I'll use Prince of Wales as an example, that pathway may never get done. It should have been done years ago. It's just a graded pathway or like a gravel. But my point is, if we wait for that road to default to get that pathway may never get, and that's the one that is connected to the Sanders River, where we see many seniors and everybody trying to walk. So I just don't want that to just be the only status quo that we use for that example. Through you, Madam Mayor, if that's just a takeaway.
Through you, Mayor Masters. So those are things in our integrated planning that we look at right now. So if a roadway, to your point, Councillor, wasn't going to be rebuilt for 10 years out, and there is a higher need to complete a pathway in a certain area, then we definitely will look at that. all of our groups now come together in the planning process, which in the past, we were probably more isolated in how we did that. So definitely appreciate the comment and the feedback, and we'll take that back to our team.
And I want to just a comment, if I can. I just want to say thank you for the coordination of projects. It's been much better in the last couple of years for sure compared to previous years. I really want to say thank you for that, because in the east, where we only have a couple of gateways out, it really does, we do appreciate the coordination of the construction, both being able to use Vic or Arcola when both is being worked on. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Councillor Nelson.
Just a quick question, when you were talking about the road repair and people, if we notice, which I happen to have noticed, a road that was repaired this year and there's already cracks in the road, in the brand new asphalt, and there's dips in it, is there a process that we go through to bring this forward to you, or like what would happen through you, Madam Mayor?
Through you, Mayor Masters, I would say definitely we would want that brought to our attention. And then we would take that to our project team, find out who the contractor is and what the details within the contract are, and then we would deal with that with the contractor if it is within a specified warranty period.
So would it be too late to let you know now, since it's already winter, or should I wait till it's...
Nope, through Mayor Masters, anytime, we definitely wouldn't go in and try to do the repair now, but the awareness piece of it, you could bring forward anytime.
Yeah, because I've noticed this throughout just being around and finding information from other people that I know that do this kind of stuff. When those little cracks start, then within 2 years, the road is just, and so it's best to dig it up then. So, okay, thank you, that's the process, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Just have a few questions. If there was an increase in federal funding, whether it be one-time gas tax fund, this could be set aside in a reserve to complete the LOS that's been requested here on this table. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Masters, that is correct.
Is the current funding, thank you for that, is the current funding 30-40-30 between poor, fair, and good? Is that the current way that we finance, address, and so poor roads get 30% of the annual funding, fair roads get 40%, and good roads get 30%? Is that the current way we spend the money annually?
I'm going to ask Mr. Warren to comment.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters. The current typical funding breakdown is that 40% goes to poor roads, 55% goes to fair roads, and 5% goes to good roads.
And so if I'm looking at chart on page 5 of 10 correctly, we've gone from 86% poor, 83% poor to, sorry, the other way around. 86% fair to good, 83% fair to good to 89% fair to good in the last year. Is that correct? Like our number of poor roads has gone down.
Through you, Mayor Masters, that is correct. The number of poor roads has gone down.
I'm having trouble with your math on table 2, funding to achieve target LOS. Where does the model come from to spend 30% of funding on good roads, 40% on fair, and 30% on poor? Where does that model come from? Is it because the 40, 50, and 5 isn't working?
Through you, Mayor Masters, if I could just get clarification, are you asking about the funding to achieve target level of service?
Yeah, you've got table 2 results of option funding to achieve target LOS, and the split at 6992 and 69 is a 30-40-30 split between poor, fair, good. Am I
I'll
reading
turn this one
wrong?
over to Nagora.
All right, I'm going to turn your mic on.
And through you, Mayor, based on the road condition, when we have that, we develop what type of treatments it's required, and based on the unit costing every year, we update that. So that's the split it comes, so how we determine that? Each condition have a separate, different type of treatment, and each treatment has the cost. And it's financial modeling we have to go through that.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just going to suggest, and I don't know for sure, but I've heard anecdotally, it drives people crazy when we spend a whole bunch of money on good roads, when we have 11% poor in this category and for residential, where am I at? 19% poor? And so you're suggesting that the model you need in order to achieve target LOS is that 30% of all future funding is spent on good roads. Is that correct, Mr. Onright?
Through you, Mayor Masters, that is correct.
But in residential roads, in the residential renewal program we just saw, what's the spend split to get the improvement we're seeing of 3% every year in terms of moving from poor to fair to good? Well, we're making improvements in terms of moving folks out of poor roads into fair to good, and we have an 85% target in the residential renewal program, correct?
That's correct.
And we're trying to achieve that by 2026?
Yes.
That is correct.
Okay, so how do we fund fair, poor, and good on a split on residential renewal? Because we got improvement there. So what's that model in terms of funding to fair to poor, poor, fair, good?
I'll ask Mr. Warren to comment.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Masters. So, yeah, the 40-55-5 split that I had just spoke about is very similar split when it comes to the residential road model as well.
So it's working, well, technically it's working in terms of moving things out of the poor condition on major roads, but it's working in residential. Is there a reason that you're suggesting it doesn't work in your target model, how we spend right now, which is getting us improvement on residential, isn't actually the way we need to spend on major roads?
Through you, Mayor Masters. So I'll maybe just back up a little bit. So when it comes to the comparison between the two programs, we do have a little bit different levels of service targets. So when it comes to the residential road renewal program, it's an 85% target that we try to achieve that 85% of all roads are in fair or better condition. The current model in that program suggests that by 2026 we'll achieve that target. But we also have our modeling going even further into the future, and it shows that by 2036 that curve the curve starts to deteriorate faster than the investment takes place. So again, there will be a point in time where that funding model will need to be adjusted as well. When it comes to the street infrastructure renewal program, the level of service target is 100% of roads in fair or better condition, and the reason for that is that I believe the number is about 80% of all traffic use that major road network, so it does have a higher level of service. So that's why maybe some of the math is not exactly the same when it comes to the comparison of both of the two projects, programs.
Thank you. I really appreciate the explanation because the math wasn't making sense to me. Here's the problem. I totally support the idea that where 85 to 90% of the traffic should be in fair to better condition. The thing is 100% of people live in residential neighborhoods. And so to ask for money to come out to slow that down where they're sitting in poor condition at a much lower, frankly, rate outside of the poor condition. We're saying that residences can live with poor condition to the tune of, well, if 85% of them are good, we're met our target. We're saying 100% of major roads. I'm just suggesting that we may have a bigger problem here from a funding perspective, as I make Mr. Onright laugh. And I guess where I'm going is if we can negotiate a higher, perhaps, gas tax transfer on a one-time basis, that there would be serious consideration an argument made on street infrastructure that in order to catch up or to get ahead a bit of this curve that you're looking for, that be set aside in a reserve. That's all. I'll be done now. Councillor Hawkins, did you want to close off?
Oh, that's it. We can always spend more money, I guess. Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. I have a seconder. Thank you, clerks. Can you please call the vote?
Stadnichuk in favor.
Mayor Masters, the motion passes unanimously with all 9 members present voting in favor.
Thanks so much to the clerks. We'll now consider item CR 22-124 street, nope, sorry. Gosh, I'm going back in time here. I get to go forward. Item IR 22-3, 2021 Annual Investment Report. A member of administration, Mr. Lacey, I'm assuming it's you. Please present.
Through you, Mayor Masters. City Council members might recall in 2021, the investment policy was revised. And as part of those revisions, it provided for the ability for the city to invest in a broader range of financial instruments. And along with those amendments to the investment policy, an annual reporting requirement was introduced as well, such that council would receive an annual report on our investments. So this report before you today is quite short, as in 2021 our investments, as we were moving to an external investment manager and that longer range portfolio of investments, we continued to have our funds in short-term investments, GICs, and in bank accounts, and so the report's quite short. I do expect in 2022, now that we have an investment manager, we've begun moving through 2022 some of our funds to the investment manager who is investing in other broader financial instruments. The report will be much more robust, and it will measure those investments against the benchmarks council has set in the bylaw and the returns that we have set in the bylaw and through policy with respect to return expectations. I would just note, when you look on the table in 2019, as we moved into 2021, we did have investments in long-term bonds, and because of market conditions, we did move those investments into a short-term investment portfolio, just given where the market was at. And then COVID hit in 2020, and we made a conscious decision to keep our cash liquid and in those investment returns. So with that, as we move into 2022, I do expect to see higher investments as we see the benefits of moving to that new investment policy and strategy take effect. Happy to answer any questions council might have.
Thanks very much, Mr. Lacey. Can I get a motion to move the report? Thank you, Councillor Skidniak, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Nasson. Please go ahead, Councillor Skidniak.
Thank you. I do have a question in relation to the report for next year, because I understand there's not a lot for us to say for this year. So in the next report, I'm just curious, in alignment with council's priorities, will there be discussion about our investment strategy in relation to environmental, social, and governance? ESG factors, like what's our ESG investment strategy? I can't remember if we discussed this when we were creating the policy. What I'm wondering is if there will be discussion of that in the next report that we see.
Yeah. So thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor Masters. So we do not have a specific policy around that piece, although my recollection is when we were sourcing an external investment manager, many of these investment managers already have these social compact policies with respect to how they undertake investment. We can certainly ensure that we cover that aspect off in our 2022 report. And maybe I just ask, I don't know if Ms. Farrell has any additional information around the practices of our investment manager, because I do remember talking to them about that, but I'll just ask if she has any additional information on that today.
Through the chair, we do have some formal reporting that's being given to us through the investment manager, and that considers compliance reports and ensuring that it aligns with our investment policy. At this time, he hasn't been reporting on that aspect. That's definitely something that we can consider in the future and ask if he can kind of provide more information.
Okay, so just to clarify, in the next report, we could have specific information in relation to ESG factors, environmental, social, and governance, investments.
So I just want to, through you, Mayor Masters, I want to make sure what I'm committing to here.
Okay, yeah, me too, so that sounds good.
So, so currently, we do not have a formal
Yeah.
policy on those factors.
Right.
My recollection is, as we went through the process, that we had those conversations with our investment manager and how they, how they employed those policies. When we bring the report back, my commitment is we'll ensure that through that report, we have a discussion about those factors.
Yeah.
And how they are not factored into the investments our investment manager makes. And I think that will provide council, additional information about whether or not more direction is required or not required based on that information.
Okay, and through that report then, in terms of like what we are or are not doing, would there potentially then be a recommendation from administration about a policy that we could adopt in relation to ESG?
Through Mayor Masters, I think that's fair that when we come back, we can have some commentary about our views about whether or not we think where we're currently at is sufficient, or whether or not additional steps need to be taken and what those might look like for council's consideration.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Zakitian. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you very much. Sorry, apologize. Through you, Madam Mayor. So, did you say we have hired an investment manager already?
So through you, Mayor Masters, yes, and the investment manager is TD Asset Management.
Oh, so it's an organization?
Correct.
Okay.
And we have procured that that investment manager through a competition, procurement competition.
Okay, okay. Okay, so that's, I understood as we brought an employee, okay, so thank you for that clarification. Because I don't remember approving that as another employee into, okay. Okay, so, thank you for that clarity. So you're saying the next report will come with more clarity. When would that come, next year, or?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters, certainly we'd like to see the timing of these reports get to you earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So I am hopeful, and what we are targeting is to bring this forward, this report in June, after we're 6 months into the new fiscal year. So within the first half of the new fiscal year.
Okay, okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Seeing nothing further, Councillor Hawkins. Deputy Mayor, did you wish to close off debate?
Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you so much. Clerks, could I ask that you please call the vote?
Stadnichuk in favor.
Mayor Masters, yes. Mayor Masters, the vote carries 9-0 with all members present voting in favor.
Thank you very much, the clerks. Call on Councillor Bob Hawkins to read notice of motion MN 22-6, reconsideration motion.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Therefore be it resolved that City Council reconsider its decision of October 26, 2022, respecting curbside waste services funding policy, specifically the approved amendment respecting the affordability program. 2, reverse the decision to provide the rebate to all low-income households, and reinstate the original recommendation from administration to provide the rebate to low-income households with seniors and/or persons with disability. 3, instruct the city solicitor to incorporate this change into the required bylaw amendments to the Waste Management Bylaw 2020-12, bylaw number 2020-12-63.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hawkins. All questions and discussions are held until November 23rd, 2022. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Can I get a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Skidniak. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Seeing none, adjourned. Thank you, administration. Thank you, the council.